Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and we now continue with our exploration of Asian horror. This video will cover films released from 1975 to 1979. So let's get started, and we begin with a bit of a trendsetter, and that is Black Magic from 1975, a Hong Kong horror thriller hybrid. Now in this film, a seductive widow hires an evil sorcerer to place a love hex on a man that she's interested in. Now this particular sorcerer makes money off of this practice, but complications arise when the victim and his friends hire a white wizard to break the spell. Now Black Magic is one of the earlier spellcasting films from Hong Kong, and it seemed to inspire future films that would follow this particular subgenre's formula. The wizardry that's typically showcased in these films can vary significantly from very simplistic items like the use of hair or animal blood to very complex combinations of items that require bizarre forms of preparation. Now the spellcasting in this movie, Black Magic, is pretty basic for the genre, and not nearly as crazy as some of the other Hong Kong sorcery flicks that arrived in subsequent years, a few of which we will cover later in this Asian horror movie project, and one of which is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. But with regard to Black Magic, the pacing here it's a tad on the slow side, I think, but it still has some cool sequences, and some of the character interaction is fun to watch as well. I would say that I would recommend this if you want a non-extreme Hong Kong spellcasting film to start with. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good one to start with if you're looking to get into this subgenre. Now the DVD availability of Black Magic is widely available, so you could pick it up on Amazon or a number of DVD websites. So now we move on to the sequel to Black Magic, and that's Black Magic 2. Now, I liked the first one here. Is the second one as good as the first one? Is it better? Is it not quite as good? Let's see here. Now again, this is a Hong Kong horror thriller hybrid, and it's from 1976. So at least they waited a year before coming out with the sequel, right? In this one, a doctor investigates bizarre illnesses that were caused by an evil wizard's black magic. So this doctor's seeing odd things that you normally wouldn't see in a doctor's office. Stuff like bizarre types of flesh wounds that are unnatural, giant nails that are drilled into people's heads in order to control their minds, things like that. So this guy gets a little suspicious that something weird is going on. Now, the character interaction in Black Magic 2 isn't quite as engaging as in the first film, but there is enough good stuff to enjoy. The violence on display here is a bit more intense than its predecessor, but again, it isn't quite as gory as you might think going into it. With that said, however, there are a few naughty bits here, which include some nudity and sex as well. So, there's some of that in there if you're into that. But, such things really are necessary when the wizard's elixir of life is fresh breast milk. It's important to the story. You have to show breasts in this type of film. I could see the script writer and the director just, pitching this idea to a producer, be like, listen, we need to show breasts here because it's imperative to the storyline. I don't know. But it's decent stuff regardless, if you're going to buy that explanation. So if you enjoy the first Black Magic film, I'd say give the second one a shot. I would rate it a little bit less, but hey, why not? Now, DVD availability, just like the first film, is widely available, so it's out there for you. Now, next, if you thought those movies were a little odd, oh boy. So we come now to Shogun's Sadism, also known as The Joys of Torture 2. Oxen Split Torturing from 1976, a Japanese exploitation horror anthology. That's a mouthful. This movie, just the title Okay, the alternate title, I should say, Oxen Split Torturing. Now you might think, there's some movies that have crazy titles. They don't really come strong with the gore or the nudity or whatever. This one really brings it. Okay, so one thing to understand is that it's not a direct sequel to The Joys of Torture from 1968, which we previously covered. So you can watch these films in any order. They're self-containing storylines. However, if you have to choose between one of the two to watch, I say watch Shogun Sadism, because it's definitely the more memorable of the two. So this film consists of 2 short stories that are set in Edo during the Shogun era. Now the first story is about a sadistic lord who has his minions experiment with new ways to torture and kill people. Now, the antagonist in this segment is just insanely brutal. I mean, much of his focus is set on annihilating Christians who are in Japan at the time. There are multiple scenes of rape, as well as a plentiful array of torture and murder. There are some really nasty moments of violence and gore here. A few acts are actually inflicted upon a child. So if you want a film with some guts and I guess some inappropriate moments, here you go. Now the second story of this 2-story anthology is about a man and a prostitute who get into trouble. And of course that leads to torture and whatnot. Now this segment has less violence than the first part, but what is there is certainly nasty enough. This segment also has some bits of black humor spliced in, which is quite odd. I'm not sure if I really liked the small bits of black humor that were chucked in, but I don't know, I'd probably have to watch it again to give a final determination on that aspect. In any case, this movie has some serious balls, and should definitely satisfy those who seek out depraved cinema. It's practically, I can't, I'm saying this about an exploitation film, and I don't say this that often about exploitation films, but this one, it really is a must-see if you're into this kind of thing. It's one of those films that I'm just never going to forget, you know what I mean? And, it's not, how can I say this? You know what, let me just segue into a little discussion on torture films in general, alright? Because Shogun Sadism is a great example of how to make a torture film that's entertaining to a degree, if you're into this kind of thing. Now, first of all, the reason why it works is because it's not as repetitive as many films of this kind. It keeps moving along, things keep happening, and it mixes things up with different types of violence. Unlike, say, films such as Guinea Pig, Flowers of Flesh and Blood, or Psycho the Snuff Reels, which we will unfortunately get to later in this playlist, those films get very monotonous, very tedious in how they portray the violence. So, Shogun Sadism kind of avoids that monotony, and that really helps it. Also, the villains in Shogun Sadism are reprehensible, but not obnoxious, which makes them watchable. And that's kind of important. Like, when you see somebody torturing someone or something, I prefer, personally, to have them be either interesting or quirky or menacing, but I don't like it when they're real obnoxious just to watch, because it just takes me out of the film, and the film becomes more annoying than disturbing or entertaining. Some of Rob Zombie's films would qualify with that criticism. So, Shogun Sadism has certain qualities that really help it as a torture film, I think. Now, DVD availability on this one, unfortunately, is not good. I recently saw it listed on eBay and iOffer, though. So if you can find it listed on there and you're into this type of thing, definitely try to check it out. Alright, so next, we go from one torture film to the next, and this one is terrible. And it is actually a sequel/spin-off of a film we covered previously. And this is Torture Chronicles Continues, 100 Years, Japanese exploitation film from 1977. So this is a follow-up to the film 100 Years of Torture, The History, from 1975, which I covered in my last video. Now this film, or I should say that film, was unquestionably one of Koji Wakamatsu's worst efforts of his entire career. But can this follow-up really be as terrible as that film? Yes. Yes, it can. Now, like its predecessor, this film has a short runtime of only 63 minutes. Should go by in a breeze, but it doesn't. Even though it's packed with rape and torture, it's no. See, unlike Shogun Sadism, this is way too monotonous for its own good. And the problem is that the violence is just not creative. It's real, how can I say this? Real non-thought-provoking? No, that's not the term I want to use. It's very just lazy. Like, nobody really thought of interesting ways to portray this type of stuff. The production values, like its predecessor, are atrocious. And even the direction is bad, like its predecessor. Avoid both these films. I mean, there's a very small chance you'll ever come across them because they're so obscure, but if you ever do, or if you're going through Wakamatsu's filmography, you can skip these, even if you're a fan of this director. Next, we move to a Taiwan and Hong Kong co-production from 1977 called The Witch with the Flying Head. Now there seems to be some confusion as to when this movie was initially released. IMDb previously listed it as 1977, but subsequently changed the year to 1982. And I'm not sure why, because almost every other website lists it as 1977. So that's what I'm going with. Now in this film, a woman who has been cursed by a witch must rip off her head every night so it can fly around, attack people, and drink their blood, which keeps her alive. After she feeds, her head returns to her body, and then the next, during the day, she walks around and talks and engages people normally, like a normal human being, right? So obviously this nutty premise will provoke some giggles from viewers, especially when they see that the woman's full spine, as well as her heart and guts, are still attached to her flying head. So this one has a certain level of entertainment value. Some online reviewers have talked this one up quite a bit, but for some reason I didn't find it nearly as insane as I was led to expect. I mean, there are a few crazy moments here, but overall it's a pretty good flick. But just don't expect anything like mind-blowing, It's an amusing oddity is how I would say. Now, I haven't been able to find it with subtitles yet, so that's just something to keep in mind. The availability of this one, it's streaming on YouTube, but without subtitles. So, it's your choice to make there. Next. Alright, we got a big one, folks. This is a big one. An all-time classic. I gotta say it's a classic. And I'm talking, of course, about House, also known as Hausu, from 1977. I would classify this as a Japanese horror comedy. Now, this is a film by director Nobuhiko Obayashi, who has also directed a handful of other interesting films, most of which, unfortunately, do not have DVD releases with English subtitles. But thankfully, House is widely available, and is also arguably his most purely entertaining movie. So this film is about a girl and her friends who visit her aunt's countryside mansion, which is unfortunately under the control of an evil witch. Now, the first thing you need to understand about this one, okay? The editing, the scoring, and the camera work are completely insane. It's spliced together in such a hectic manner that it might be too hectic for some viewers. I have seen a few people put off by its overall style, because this one's in your face. It uses fade-outs, anime layovers to the live-action footage, silent filming supplemented with character commentary at times, in-picture spotlights, and a plethora of whacked-out special effects that create just a frenetic pacing that is an assault on the senses. Now, with regard to the special effects, some are actually pretty neat. but others are very cartoonish and outdated. The set designs, though, are consistently good, and the sheer energy on display gives it this endearing charm. You know what? I didn't find this film to be annoying at all. You know, even though it was constantly throwing stuff at you, I thought it was a very charming film, and I think that's quite an accomplishment for a film this insane. Even the humor is effective, I thought, and there are tons and tons of WTF moments peppered all over the place. But there's also a lot of subtle details, especially in the background. Like, there's so much going on sometimes in the frame of that it's showing you, right, on screen, that sometimes you'll miss a cool little thing that's happening in the background, and you'll only catch it after a third or second viewing. So this movie is really good for repeat viewings, because you'll definitely notice some stuff that you didn't notice the first time around. So don't blink or else you'll miss something. So, I mean, I gotta say that House is definitely in my top 5 craziest films of all time. If I were just voting on just sheer insanity, this is in the top 5. And I think that it's also highly entertaining, and I highly recommend this. Now, the DVD availability of House is widely available because they got a Criterion DVD release, a good one, a few years ago. So Criterion can make their contributions for sure. Now, on a side note, make sure if you pick up the Criterion DVD to watch Obayashi's film Emotion from 1966, which is included as a special feature on that DVD. It's a very bizarre experimental short film that's about 40 minutes long, about a small-town girl who moves to a city and befriends a variety of odd people, including Dracula. So if you watch House and you enjoy it, give Emotion a shot as well. I mean, they're on the same DVD set. Definitely see that one. Next film on our list is The Village of 8 Gravestones, a Japanese horror film from 1977. Now, in this film, the heir to a family fortune discovers that a curse has been placed on it, put there centuries before by a band of samurai warriors. Now, this may be a story about a supernatural curse, or it could be a murder mystery with a naturalistic explanation, or perhaps both. So, you know, is someone pulling strings behind the scenes and getting away with murder to snag the family fortune, or is there really a curse that's happening here? So that's one of the aspects that makes this one kind of an interesting watch. The plot overall is set mostly in the 1970s, with a few flashbacks to the past. Natural environments are captured nicely, so that's always a nice thing. Viewer be warned that there are a few scenes of some pretty graphic violence here, which surprised me, because I wasn't necessarily expecting that in this particular film, and it caught me by surprise. But there's not an excessive amount. This is not Shogun Sadism. So I don't think this is a film to be scared of, but just something to be aware of. On the negative side, the one problem I have with this one is that it does move very slowly, and the runtime does seem a bit too long at 150 minutes. But I still think I would recommend this one. This is a good movie. Now, The Village of 8 Gravestones is difficult to find. So just, you know how I always say in these videos, just keep a lookout and put it on your to-see list and check it out when it pops up again. Next film on this list, we move back to the Philippines now. Alright? So the Philippines is our first Filipino horror film for this particular video, it looks like. And this is one from 1977, and it is called Maligno. Alright, so this film is from the same director as Kill Barbara with Panic from 1974, which we covered previously, and he uses some of the same cast here as well. So if you watch that film and you like some of the actors, it might be a reason to check this one out. So the plot here is that a satanic cult targets a couple and their unborn child. Now, it sounds vaguely familiar to Roman Polanski's film Rosemary's Baby, right? And although I feel that Polanski's film is more impressive overall, this is a watchable film in its own right. Now, it's definitely been on the long side at 133 minutes, but the horror sequences do ramp up more and more as the story progresses. So it interests you a little bit more, and it builds on you, as it goes along. The lighting, in my opinion, was a bit too dark during some scenes, so much so that it was difficult to see what was happening at times. Nevertheless, there are more than enough cultish dangers to make this one enjoyable. And from what I've seen online, this seems to be considered a horror classic in its home country. I haven't been able to find it with subtitles yet. I had to watch it without. Availability on this, difficult to find. I'm almost certain I saw it on YouTube, but I couldn't find it when I looked recently. So, if you're, there's certain fans out there of old school Filipino horror. I want to put on your list if you like that stuff. Next, we move back to Japan for a interesting one. This is called The Legend of Dinosaurs and Monster Birds from 1977. Alright, so a Japanese village is menaced by a plesiosaur from the depths of the sea. But let me get this right here, Rhamphorhynchus also arrives to terrorize. If you don't know what a Rhamphorhynchus is, feel free to watch this movie. You'll get an idea, I guess. So one may think that this starts off more... Well, there's certain aspects of this film that, even though it's a kaiju film really at heart, I do think it's more of a horrific kaiju film. Remember back in one of my... I think the first video of this Asian horror series, I said that I would not include any more Godzilla films. I just include the first one in this playlist because the rest of them are more like action, comedy, sci-fi films. But I still felt the need to include this Legend of Dinosaurs and Monster Birds because it just, when I watched it, it felt like a horror movie to me. I don't know. And there's even a few scenes that seem like it's trying to be like Jaws. I mean, really, that's like how some of the scenes are. But in actuality, it is kind of a bad comparison too, because it's more like a Sci-Fi Channel original than anything else. But here, you have charming rubber monsters instead of boring CGI cartoons. So, to me personally, I'd rather see rubber special effects, practical effects, than I would CGI if it's a Sci-Fi Channel type budget. That's just my personal opinion. The actual fight between the beasts doesn't occur until late in the film, like near the very end, but I thought it was a lot of fun. One odd element here is the soundtrack, which has absolutely no relevance whatsoever to events occurring on screen. But I was actually laughing at times because it was way too groovy for its own good. I mean, you got people being attacked and killed by these huge beasts, and it's like, you just want to get up and dance. It's ridiculous. But the violence is a bit bloodier than your typical kaiju film, which again is one of the reasons why I'm including it here. Now, it is dull in spots. The script basically sucks, but I found this to be watchable. I thought it was a pretty good flick. Well, maybe not pretty good, but pretty fun. How about that? Now, The Legend of Dinosaurs and Monster Birds is widely available on DVD. You can make that decision for yourself. Alright, so we go from a fun, cheesy flick to a real nasty one again. Here we go. We're hitting some nasty movies now, aren't we? I discussed in my previous videos that, you're starting to see differences. Maybe less Japanese samurai films. You're getting to some nasty exploitation stuff here. And this is a Japanese exploitation film now that we're talking about, called Serial Rapist from 1978. Now, this is another film from our good friend Koji Wakamatsu. Now, the last few Wakamatsu films we covered were the 100 Year of Torture films, and those were terrible. Most fortunately, though, Serial Rapist is a return to form. That sounded really weird. But, I mean, I found this one entertaining, despite being pretty nasty. And this film is about a chubby guy who rapes and then shoots random women in the vagina. Yeah. Wakamatsu pulled this stunt before, but with a with a samurai sword in a previous film that we covered from him, right? That's basically the only thing that happens in this movie. So it's kind of hard for me to sell this one to you. It really is. But I think Wakamatsu is on his game in this one in terms of direction and the aesthetic qualities. I mean, this guy's usually on his game. You know, some of the previous films we just reviewed, I don't know what the guy was doing. I don't know if it was a paycheck. I don't know. But he's back on his game with this one. I found it to be an engaging film. The visuals are a bit drab and gritty, but Wakamatsu, I think, was going for that here. And it works. The score in this, very interesting and very effective. It's a mix of percussion, noises, saxophone, and city sounds. So if you want to see a movie with a really kind of oddball score setup that works, this is one to see. The brief 60-minute runtime also helps to maintain pacing here, and fans of trashy exploitation should check this one out. Now, unfortunately, DVD availability on Serial Rapist is not good, but you know, if you like that type of thing, mark it down. Look out for it. Next, we go to Indonesia now. Ooh, this is our first visit to Indonesia in this Asian Horror Year in Review playlist. And that is The Queen of Black Magic from 1979. Now, this film is about the following. After being wrongfully accused of witchcraft and thrown off a cliff to her death, a woman survives and learns the black arts for revenge. So basically, this woman is accused of witchcraft by her former lover, who experienced the effects of curses at his wedding to another woman. So obviously he assumes, hey, my ex must be doing this, because who else would be doing it? But was it really his ex? See what I mean? He might have been assuming things wrongly here. Now, this is definitely a cult film. It's kind of cheesy in spots, with some subpar script writing and dialogue. But some of the death scenes are actually pretty cool here. And in the voodoo-esque spellcasting is always fun to watch, in my opinion. The final duel could have been better, I think. It doesn't really end on a strong note. It kind of ends on a whimper. But I still think this is pretty good. It's entertaining. It's an oddball film. You know, if you're into that thing, definitely. No, you could check it out. Now, The Queen of Black Magic is widely available on DVD. So, we've been hitting a lot of inconsistency here, you know. Either something's really widely available or it's just tough to find. Usually there's some stuff in the middle. No, not here. So now we've come to our last film in tonight's video. And the last film in the 1970s we're going to cover. And this one is a good one. It's called Demon Pond from 1979 from Japan. And this one is a bit different and very cool. A teacher travels through a woodland village and meets a long-lost friend who has promised to uphold an ancient legend. Ring a bell 3 times per day, or a dragon god will destroy the village by flood. So this was directed by Masahiro Shinoda, who also gave us the excellent film Under the Blossoming Cherry Trees from 1975. I was selling that one hard to you last time, so you better watch that one. Is Demon Pond as good? Well, it's hard to be as good as Under the Blossoming Cherry Trees, but this is a good movie. And it's unique because the horror elements are presented in a theatrical stage play style, with both humans and spirits getting some screen time. It feels like a kabuki play in spots, and one of the female characters was played by a man who was one of Japan's most popular kabuki actors. I believe his name was Tamasaburo Bando. So, in terms of aesthetics and the way the film looks and feels, there's excellent scoring here, impressive set designs, and gloomy natural environments that sustain a spooky fairy tale mood from start to finish. So if you're into like folklore type films, this is one to look out for. The ending I think is also very cool. Now the pacing is a bit slow. There are a few slow patches to get through, but if you're into these types of films, check it out. Now DVD availability of Demon Pond is not good, difficult to find. Sorry to do that to you, but it's going to happen with some of these older Asian horror films. But this one I definitely think you got to put on your list. And another one I probably saw on YouTube, I think. It wasn't around though when I checked the other day. So put it on your list though. It's a good one. So we finished the 1970s here. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, not a whole lot going on here in terms of Asian horror, but there's still a good variety of entertaining films, as well as a few all-time classics. Now, I would say that, as I've said about a million times before, Under the Blossoming Cherry Trees, Shogun Sadism, and House are the must-sees from this decade. But if you should cross paths with Demon Pond, The Killer Snakes, or the Toho Vampire Trilogy, then be sure to give those a look as well. And any of the other ones that sounded interesting. You know, at the end of some of these videos, I just give you, 3 or 4 of my favorites. But if anything seemed interesting to you, even the ones that I didn't like, try to track them down. And, be sure to join me in my next video where we will explore Asian horror from the 1980s, which has almost twice as many films to cover when compared to the 1970s. So it's going to be good times. We're going to be busy. And as always, we'll see you next time.